There are cities that live forever in stone and memory, and then there are cities swallowed by silence, cities whose walls crumbled, whose voices faded, yet their stories burn like embers waiting to be told. One of those cities was Owu. Owu was no ordinary kingdom. She was proud, she was strong, she was feared. Her walls stood high, her gates stood firm, and her people believed no enemy could touch them. But fate is cruel. When Owu fell, it was not only the walls that shattered, but the lives of her women. This is their story, not the story of kings who waged war, not the story of generals who plotted battles, but of the women, mothers, wives, daughters, and sisters who carried a kingdom's sorrow on their backs. The women of Owu, before the flames, before the cries. Owu thrived. It was a city alive with song and laughter. At dawn, the market square would awaken first. The beating of mortars echoed across the streets as women pounded yam with strong arms, their voices rising in sweet chorus to ease the work. The smell of palm oil sizzling in clay pots drifted through the air. Merchants laid out their treasures on woven mats. Colorful cloth dyed in indigo and camwood. Beads carved from coral. Shiny cowries clinking like coins. Children chased each other between the stalls, their laughter ringing out like bells. Women balanced calabashes on their heads, weaving through the crowd with practiced grace. Hunters returned from the forest with fresh kills slung across their shoulders. Antelope, bushfowl, and sometimes even leopards, their skins destined for royalty. The forges roared as blacksmiths struck iron, each hammering blow echoing like a heartbeat. Their hands shaped spears and hoes, knives and ornaments, the very lifeblood of a warrior people. Potters worked their wheels, clay spinning into graceful water jars and wide cooking pots. Everywhere there was life. The women of Owu were the thread weaving it all together. They traded, they cooked, they raised children, they carried stories in their songs and laughter in their gatherings. Without them, Owu was nothing, and Owu knew it was mighty. High walls rose around the city, built from mud and stone, their tops lined with sharp thorns. The gates were huge, sturdy wood bound in iron spikes. Enemies who looked upon them saw only despair. Inside those walls, the people of Owu felt untouchable. But pride, they say, comes before the fall. Peace, like a fragile clay pot, never lasts forever. The first cracks in Owu's glory came quietly, like whispers carried by the wind. Merchants returning from distant towns brought uneasy news. Allies turning against allies. Kingdoms sharpening their spears in secret. And everywhere, people murmured one word, Owu. Why? Because Owu was feared. And when the mighty grow too proud, envy brews in the shadows. The market still bustled. The children still laughed. But beneath the surface, the people of Owu could feel it. The tension, like a drumbeat before the storm. In the palace, the king's council debated endlessly. Some urged caution. Let us seek peace. Let us make alliances before it is too late. Others scoffed. Peace? Owu is strong. Our walls are high. Our warriors fearless. Let the world come. None can touch us. And so the pride of Owu grew heavier, like a crown of iron pressing down. The women, though, they felt the change most keenly. At the market stalls, gossip ran hotter than the fires in the smithy. They say Ife and Ijebu are plotting against us. No, no, it is Ibadan we must fear. Have you not heard? They all ate us. They are all sharpening their spears. The laughter that once filled the air now cracked under the weight of uncertainty. Mothers hushed their children's games earlier. Wives watched their husbands train with weapons, their hearts sinking with dread. And daughters clutched their songs a little tighter, as if melody alone could shield them from fate. The storm was coming, and though Owu pretended not to see it, the women could already hear the thunder in their bones. And then it happened. The storm the women feared finally broke. At first, it was only a rumor, an echo carried by trembling messengers, but soon the truth became undeniable. The combined armies of Ife, Ijebu, and Oyo were marching, not against each other, but against Owu, a coalition of kingdoms united by envy and fear. For years they had whispered in the dark, Owu has grown too proud. Owu's riches blind the land. Owu must fall. Now, their whispers had become war drums. The day the enemy arrived, the earth shook beneath their feet. The skies seemed to darken as endless ranks of warriors appeared, shields flashing, spears glinting, war songs tearing through the air. Inside Owu, the drums of defense thundered in response. Warriors tightened their belts. Women rushed to hide their children. Elders raised trembling prayers to the gods. The gates of Owu, once symbols of strength, groaned shut. The siege had begun. For days, then weeks, then months, the enemy surrounded them. Food dwindled. Water became precious. At night, the wails of the hungry echoed through the once proud city. And still, Owu stood. The warriors fought bravely at the walls. The women stitched wounds, carried water, whispered strength into the ears of their children. Every mother became a shield. Every wife became a pillar. Every daughter became a flame of hope. But the siege was relentless. The coalition armies starved Owu, waiting for the proud city to break. And slowly, Owu began to crack. The walls of Owu had stood for centuries, thick, high, and proud, a shield against countless threats. But now, after months of siege, hunger gnawed at the people from within. Their once mighty walls had become their prison. Inside, children's cries echoed through the night. Mothers held them close, whispering lullabies not to soothe them to sleep, but to quiet their hunger. The markets, once alive with the hum of traders, the bright colors of cloth, and the fragrance of roasted yams, were now ghostly silent. Stalls stood empty, the air smelled only of despair. And outside, the enemy waited, patient, ruthless. The allied armies, Ijebu, Ife, and their partners, tightened the noose day by day. Each passing sunrise brought new strategies. Each passing sunset brought more fear into the hearts of Owu's defenders. Finally, the inevitable came. Pause. One moonless night, the attackers broke through. Fire lit the sky. The gates, once so carefully guarded, were splintered like matchwood. The thunder of war drums filled the air, followed by screams, clash of steel, and the crackle of flames. Owu, the proud kingdom, had fallen. But the story was far from over. As the men of Owu fell, one by one on the battlefield, cut down by sword and fire, silence fell over the smoking ruins. But from that silence, voices began to rise. They were the voices of the women, widows, mothers, daughters, all who had lost everything. Their husbands lay dead. Their children were stolen into slavery. Their homes burned to ashes. And yet, through their grief, through their tears, they stood tall, no longer victims, no longer shadows. The women of Owu became the soul of survival. With their men gone, it was they who bore the weight of rebuilding, not with bricks and mortar, but with willpower and resilience. They mourned, but they refused to vanish into silence. In Yoruba tradition, women had always been the keepers of the hearth, the nurturers of lineage. But now, they were also warriors of spirit. They sang songs of sorrow that echoed through the ruins like chants of defiance. Their wailing was not weakness, it was a call to memory, a way to make sure the story of Owu would never be erased. These women became living monuments, flesh and blood reminders that even if Owu had fallen, its essence still lived, and their story is why we still speak of Owu today. The destruction of Owu was not just an end, it was a cruel transformation. The conquerors stripped the city bare. Families were torn apart. Women were dragged into slavery, forced to walk endless miles under the crack of whips. Their children sold into foreign lands. But even in bondage, they carried Owu with them. The women of Owu became the keepers of memory. In the strange villages they were sold to, in the foreign households where they were made to serve, they whispered the stories of their homeland. They sang songs in secret, teaching their children words in Yoruba so that Owu would not vanish completely. Every lullaby was a protest. Every prayer was an act of defiance. Even when forbidden to speak, they hummed melodies of Owu under their breath. They turned their grief into strength. They turned their pain into memory. Through these women, Owu lived on, not as a city of walls and gates, but as a city carried in the heart. And that was more powerful than any fortress. The fall of Owu was not just history, it became a spiritual warning. Priests, elders, and seers whispered, "No kingdom falls without reason." Owu, they said, was strong, but pride, betrayal, and greed opened the gates wider than any enemy could. Among the Yoruba, the women of Owu became symbols of endurance. When mothers sang lullabies, they wove the lesson into songs, warning their children against arrogance, reminding them that even the mightiest walls cannot protect a people who abandon unity. The ashes of Owu may have been scattered, but the story of our women did not fade. From village to village, town to town, whispers traveled. Traders carried the tale along dusty roads, minstrels sang it in crowded marketplaces, and priests recited it at moonlit gatherings. The story grew of a city that stood tall, and of women who, when the walls fell, became the backbone of memory. They were no longer just captives, they became storytellers, singers, healers, and teachers. In strange lands, they were the ones who kept Yoruba traditions alive. The conquerors thought they had destroyed Owu, but the women turned sorrow into a weapon. Every child they raised, every song they sang, every craft they taught carried a piece of Owu into the future. Generations later, when children asked where their mothers came from, the answer was whispered with pride. Owu. The fall of Owu was not just history, it became a spiritual warning. Priests, elders, and seers whispered, "No kingdom falls without reason." Owu, they said, was strong, but pride, betrayal, and greed opened the gates wider than any enemy could. Among the Yoruba, the women of Owu became symbols of endurance. When mothers sang lullabies, they wove the lesson into songs, warning their children against arrogance, reminding them that even the mightiest walls cannot protect a people who abandon unity. And yet, there was hope, because in every prayer, in every chant, the women of Owu were remembered, not as victims, but as guardians. They became spiritual mothers of resilience, proof that even in ashes, culture survives. Their suffering was not wasted. It became a lesson carved into the soul of a people. The ashes of Owu had cooled, but the fire inside the women burned on. At first, they were scattered, captives in strange lands, servants in foreign homes, strangers where once they were queens. The conquerors had thought that the spirit of Owu was destroyed, but they were wrong. Piece by piece, the women rebuilt their dignity. Some became traders in bustling Yoruba markets, their voices echoing with confidence as they sold beads, cloth, and spices. Others became healers, mixing herbs, saving lives, and earning the respect of new communities. And some became singers, weaving the grief of Owu into haunting songs that spread across kingdoms. What had begun as mourning became power. Wherever they went, the women of Owu transformed pain into strength. People began to whisper, "These are not just captives. These are the women of Owu, daughters of resilience, mothers of unbroken spirit." Their dignity returned not because the world gave it back, but because they claimed it, carved it, and carried it within their hearts. Long after the flames died, long after the walls of Owu lay silent beneath the dust of ruin, one thing refused to be buried: the memory. The women of Owu carried it like fire, hidden in clay pots. Everywhere they went, they spoke of their land. They told the stories of their great wars, of their bustling markets, of the strength of their warriors, and of the day sorrow came dressed as war. But they did not tell these stories as victims. No, they told them as keepers of history. To their children, they painted Owu not as a land of defeat, but as a kingdom of resilience. They taught that strength is not measured by how long your walls stand, but by how fiercely your spirit survives when those walls fall. And slowly, slowly, what was once tragedy transformed into legacy. The Yoruba people beyond Owu began to remember them not for their ashes, but for their courage. Owu's name became a lesson, a reminder that kingdoms may fall, but when women rise, memory becomes immortal. And so, the story of the women of Owu does not end in ashes. Yes, the walls crumbled. Yes, the fires raged. Yes, the city was left bare, a scar upon the land. But scars are not just wounds, they are marks of survival. The men of Owu fought with valor, but it was the women who carried Owu beyond death. It was their tears that watered the seeds of resilience. It was their voices that turned pain into memory. It was their strength that turned memory into legacy. History often remembers kings, generals, conquerors, but Owu reminds us that it is often women who bear the heaviest weight of war, and yet it is often women who breathe life into history itself. The women of Owu, daughters, wives, mothers, grandmothers, they did not simply vanish into silence. No, their cries became echoes, their echoes became songs, and their songs became lessons. So when you hear the drum at a festival, when you see women rise in the face of adversity, when you hear stories of survival passed from lips to lips across generations, remember Owu. Remember the women who endured. Remember the city that fell but refused to be forgotten, because as long as the story is told, Owu still lives.